So there's going to be a few more visuals than usual over on the screen today. Don't worry, anyone like out in the back that, like me, can't read things from very far away. I'll highlight anything that you really need to know off of it. So let me tell you a story. Next slide. A supervillain by the name of Shocker, the one in yellow on the right, is wanting to rob a bank. Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can, shows up to stop him. There's a big fight, biffs and pows and quips and such, and Spider-Man ends up winning. Next slide, please. And as you can see, he webs an unconscious Shocker up, like in a little net, and leaves him there for the police or other authorities to find while he goes home to his Aunt May. And this is from the 1967 Amazing Spider-Man issue, The Amazing Shocker. Next. A Stan Lee and John Romita Spiderific Spectacular, lettered by Sam Rosen. Side note, I love comic books. And it's just one example out of many of that traditional superhero versus supervillain story. Bad guy threatens to do evil, good guy stops him, and then leaves him for the authorities to deal with. So switch gears with me to another moment in the 1960s. Specifically 1961 and the consolidation of the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America into the Unitarian Universalist Association, or our UUA. To make an extremely long history short, the UUA ends up combining the two groups and adopting a set of principles. The first of which states that we, the member congregations, and also the members therein, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Every person. So one of Spider-Man's big moral principles, one that he shares with really most superheroes out there, is that he will not kill people. And he will do pretty much anything he can to save innocent lives. Now he'll beat up the bad guys, he'll tie them up for the police, but he won't, kill them, which is a great thing. If you're a superhero, or anybody, just don't kill people. Great first lesson. I like it. However, Spidey and also many other superheroes do have a lot to learn about actually affirming and promoting the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So I want to try another take on this classic superhero story. So this time we're going to have a supervillain by the name of Hippo robbing the bank. Now Spider-Man's off somewhere else, maybe catching thieves just like flies. That's a really dehumanizing lyric to his theme song there. I think about it. Anyway, so we'll need a different superhero to handle this one. How about the unbeatable Squirrel Girl? No, that's the Reverend Squirrely Woodbury. From a few months ago, she stopped by with her reflection. No, the different one. Next one. That one. The unbeatable Squirrel Girl, pictured with her giant squirrel tail, her squirrel agility, her squirrel ability to talk to other squirrels, and she can also jump really, really good. Also really good at jumping. I think that's about it as far as superpowers go. Now, her first appearance was in a comic called Marvel Superheroes number 8 back in, I think, 1991. And she teamed up with Iron Man to defeat Dr. Doom. More on Dr. Doom later. And she'll stand in for Spider-Man this time, along with her friends, Chipmunk Hunk, Koi Boy, and her roommate Nancy. Did I mention before that I love comic books? So next up, so here we have Hippo, the human hippopotamus. He first appeared in the 2009 comic Dark Reign, the Sinister Spider-Man #1. He's attempting to rob the bank. As you can see, he's charging forward, literally speech bubble. I'm going to rob that bank if it's the last thing I do. Pretty, intent is pretty easy to prove on this one. And fortunately, though, our assembled heroes do manage to defeat him with the usual biffs, pows, and quips, such as, how do you stop a hippo from charging? Take away his credit cards. Yes. Yeah, Hippo was not a big fan of that one either. So the heroes defeat the villain. Story proceeds as usual. And then Squirrel Girl actually talks to the hippo. Next one, please. She learns his story. She finds out that he was once a hippo in a zoo that was raised up, evolutionary speaking, by a being known as the High Evolutionary. Comic books. And given a more human form and sentience, so he's like a big dude in pants and jeans and boots with a big hippo head. And after he's given this form and sentience, he's basically left to fend for himself. And he quickly finds out that in New York City, no one's willing to hire a giant hippo person. And he also still needs about 90 pounds of food a day, not to mention the cost of rent in New York City these days. And he figures that the only way out is this life of crime. And Squirrel Girl's response to that is that that's fair. That if she was in his situation, she might end up doing the exact same thing. So it was kind of hard for her to judge him based on that. And he stops and he says, "Thank you. No one like you has ever actually listened to me before." I think that's some pretty powerful affirmation. Spider-Man might learn a lesson here. Now, unfortunately, he does take this as permission to continue robbing the bank, which Squirrel Girl quickly shuts down with a suggestion to try and get a job at a demolition company. Because he's a big guy, really strong, really tough. Why not go knock down some buildings that they tell you can? Important part, that permission. And so he admits he'd never heard of a job like that. He's a hippo that used to just be a hippo a few months ago. No one told him about you can get a job busting down things for people. And he's going to give it a try. And the happy ending, a few issues later, we kind of hear back from him, and he's got a job, and he's making money, and he's doing pretty well for himself. So good on him, and good on Squirrel Girl. And this isn't like the only example of Squirrel Girl like kind of following through on our first principle. There's another one. Next, please. When Earth is threatened by the mighty Galactus, who is a giant with a big purple hat, who is from Fantastic Four number 48 back in 1966. He's the last surviving member of the universe that existed before the Big Bang, and he has to consume planets to live. Kind of a big deal. But Squirrel Girl manages to save the world with the power of friendship, some computer science, and nuts. So quick tangent, Squirrel Girl and her roommate Nancy and her friends Koi Boy and Chipmunk Hunk, they're in their secret identities, they're all computer science students at NYU. And the comics author, Ryan North, will often throw in computer science and STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, facts into the issues. So if you end up reading Squirrel Girl one day, you might actually learn something. I know I have. And they actually had a different issue than this. Squirrel Girl defeated this villain called Nightmare by using, if-then statements from computer science and also binary finger counting, where your fingers represent digits in binary. So like ones, twos, your pinky would be 1, ring finger 2, and then 4, then 8, then 16. So if you wanted to make 9, you would hold up your pinky and your index finger. So that'd be 1 plus 8, so 9. Careful with the 4s. Anyway, tangent. So back to Galactus. So after defeating him, really coming to terms with him, Squirrel Girl and her squirrel sidekick, remember she talks to squirrels, are discussing their latest victory. So Squirrel Girl confides in Tippy Toe, the squirrel, that it wasn't really that hard to find common ground with Galactus, that the secret is to remember that no one sees themselves as the bad guy. We're all the heroes of our own story. So kind of on that, have you ever been out in public? A lot of people, Maybe you're in a car during rush hour. Maybe you're at a baseball game or a comic convention. And you kind of like are just part of this huge crowd of humanity, and you kind of maybe realize that every single person around you has been alive like you have their whole life. That when you wake up in the morning, they're alive and existing and taking a part in their life, just like you are. When you're going to work, when you're going to school, when you're doing whatever it is you do during the day, maybe, I don't know, at church, all these other people they have that full life behind them and ahead of them, just like you, and they're all the heroes of their own stories too, just like you. Anyway, I mentioned Dr. Doom earlier, and I promise we will get to him. But I wanted to talk to you first about why I wanted to share this particular bit of pop culture with you today. So this was my original title, Pop Culture in Unitarian Universalism Part 1, The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, 2 U's, everywhere because you use. Fortunately, I was talked out of this, and the actual title is Pop Culture in Unitarian Universalism Part 1, The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, proper number of U's and all the words. Yeah, I know. But pop culture can be tough to navigate. That's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to do this. There's just a ton of it out there, and a lot of it just isn't very good. And there's a lot of reasons, different reasons it might not be very good. And so last summer, I was lucky enough to chaperone our Coming of Ages class heritage trip to Boston. Thanks again to any of you that may have contributed to that in any way. It was an awesome trip for the kids, and honestly, it was a pretty awesome trip for the chaperones, which is not something most chaperones can say about a group of teenagers they take halfway across the country. We got lucky with our teenagers, I guess, as far as, who they are. So while we were in Boston, one of the days we got to go to Salem, and there was a pretty cool comic shop out there. And I actually worked at a comic shop in college in Arlington and Fort Worth. And I got the opportunity to play a personal shopper for one of my fellow chaperones. And it was just really fun recommending comics and graphic novels that I thought that she and her family would enjoy. It was something I had fun doing. So next slide, another Squirrel Girl cover, this time in her flying squirrel suit. So I wanted to use my powers for good, to spread the word on different things in pop culture that would actually resonate with our Unitarian Universalist values. Now, it won't always be comic books, but this time I do recommend The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl wholeheartedly to anyone looking for a good comic to read, whether you're 6 years old or 106. And one of the reasons is that it avoids a lot of the issues, pun intended, that are prevalent in the comics industry. Where most female superheroes have costumes that leave very little to the imagination, don't worry, no pictures of that. Squirrel Girl and her friends wear really cool and practical costumes. There's even one issue where she insists on a belt with those pouches because she can't stand, pants with no pockets, which kind of a big deal in the female fashion industry these days. And so, on the other end, you have Batman, first appeared back in 1939 in Detective Comics number 27. You have a sort of rich, privileged white guy going around beating up desperate criminals that didn't have the same opportunities he had and, leaving them for the authorities, kind of like Spider-Man did earlier. Squirrel Girl would take the time to listen and help out if she could. Now, if they insisted on being jerks, she might have to beat them up too. So another little tangent kind of on that. Netflix just renewed The Punisher for a second season. For those that didn't know, The Punisher's a guy who went to Vietnam and suffers from PTSD. When he got back to the States, his family was killed as collateral damage in a shootout between gangs and the mafia, something like that. And so because of the trauma that he suffered, he puts on a shirt with a white skull painted on it, gets a bunch of guns, and goes out and kills criminals, that Batman or Spider-Man might just beat up. And this type of revenge fantasy isn't terribly new or even that unique. And if it just remained, a fantasy or a story of a, broken, damaged man, that might not be too different from some movies out there like Die Hard or John Wick. But for some people, there are people that see the Punisher as an inspiration, and unfortunately, some of these people sort of take that into the law enforcement community and our military, as evidenced by our next little bit here. Those of you that are familiar with the Back the Blue flag, it's got the American flag kind of in gray and then a blue stripe down it. And that's fine, that's a symbol that, you back police officers and such. But this is superimposed over the Punisher skull logo, which is where I have an issue with it. It's available on Amazon, by the way, $10 free shipping. You can get one for your very own vehicle, just like a lot of vehicles I see here in Texas. A lot of them also have bumper stickers declaring that they or their families are either part of the law enforcement community or in the military, which is kind of problematic because the Punisher's solution to crime is to kill people. And if that doesn't work, then you just need more and bigger guns. So kind of breaks my heart that, that version of the Punisher, I wish I could be him, is what's an inspiration to some of these people. But fortunately, there are good things that can come out of the comic world too, as evidenced by this next slide. This is a bit of fan art from a 6-year-old girl for a superhero named Hellcat, and she's got that little blue mask and a yellow outfit and this red hair and looks like some pretty good lipstick. And it's from the letters page of the issue. This 6-year-old girl sent in her fan art to the comic, and they printed it, which is cool enough for a 6-year-old. Hey, my art's in the comic book. But what really sells this for me is the response from the writer and the author. The blue is actually the writer of the comic. And she writes, "Chloe, this is the best thing in the world. I hope you keep drawing forever, and I can't wait to buy your comic someday." Think about being 6 years old, submitting something to a show or a comic or a book or an author, something you like, and this is the response you get. That's powerful. That's affirming. Anyway, I did promise to talk about Dr. Doom, and here we go. So Dr. Doom, in all his metal armor, green kind of tunic, cape, glory up there, with a very normal Dr. Doom kind of speech bubble, if you can't read it. "Fools, the mightiest heroes of any era cannot help but fall before Dr. Doom." Kind of a big deal. Also kind of refers to himself in the third person, often. So they end up, Dr. Doom and Squirrel Girl end up having a fight. It is comic books after all. And when their fight does start, they're surrounded by innocent bystanders. So luckily, Squirrel Girl had noticed a pool on a nearby roof earlier, and with the help of the quadratic equation, I told you Ryan North likes to sneak in STEM facts for you to learn. She launches the innocent bystanders from the building they're in a really good parabolic curve into the pool on the other roof, thus clearing out any innocent bystanders. Oh, if you don't remember the quadratic equation, by the way, a little mnemonic I have for my students, to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. There'll be a quiz later, don't worry about it. But this is Squirrel Girl's first instinct. It's to protect the people who can't protect themselves, and she even shakes her finger at Dr. Doom, all shall fall before doom, and admonishes him for, wildly firing in an enclosed space with civilians nearby. So once she's actually secured her friend's safety on the opposite roof, she tracks Doom to his base of operations to minimize any possible collateral damage, and when she does confront him again, she asks, "How can we work this out without fighting?" Which is not usually what happens in comic books. And Doom replies that compromise is for the weak, for one who cannot will what they want into existence. I'm not going to lie, Doom has some really great villain monologues and has for years and years. So Doom, on the next slide, says that he shall conquer this planet, for doom conquers all. Told you, great villain monologues. Now, for any other hero, this would be the end of the conversation. This would be the end of the discussion, the start of the fight, big double-page spread, biffs, bams, pows. But for Squirrel Girl, this is actually just the beginning of the conversation. And she tells him that she has some bad news for him. She says, I don't believe in monsters. Beneath that cold metal mask, you're still human like me. And I don't believe humans stop being human even when they pretend to be monsters. I believe you'll listen to reason. So when I read these panels, I knew I was reading something special, even a few years back when I read them for the first time. Something that really clicked with me. This was up here with the best of Kurt Vonnegut, with Feynman and Sagan. This is the optimism of the human spirit that I believe our first principle refers to. It's not rose-tinted glasses that says, oh, well, everyone's fine. Everyone's great, don't worry about it. Nobody's a bad person. It's It's an admission that this can be a very difficult thing to do. One of the most difficult things really in the world, but we are called to do it. And I know life isn't a comic book. Our problems don't get resolved in 22 pages with a cliffhanger at the end of the month, or at the end of the comic that has to come back next month. The forces we fight against aren't supernatural beings from beyond our universe, or even monologuing super geniuses with death lasers. But we can learn something from superheroes. We can rely on our friends. We can protect those who can't protect themselves when we can. And we can lead by example and light the way for others to follow. To be continued.